Take number 2, dose takes. It seems like every September 11th, I find myself having a conversation with somebody, and you probably do this as well, where we end up on the conversation of where we were and how we felt and that whole experience of that crazy, tragic day. And it's interesting now because I meet adults who are adults now, but they were kids basically when it happened. And they don't have really a frame of reference for it. I mean, technically they lived through it, but they don't have an experience of it. And I don't know, maybe this video is for them more than it is for those of us who lived through it. But I'll tell you my story and I'll share some thoughts afterwards. I was working at Microsoft, not doing anything super fancy. I was doing some phone support stuff, and it was a day just like any other day there. If I remember correctly, we had a TV on the wall, and the TV, the volume was down, but you could see the closed captions, and it just played stuff just for us to look at, so we didn't, lose our minds during the day, I guess. And I remember somebody saying, "Look at that. A plane just hit the World Trade Center." And the first thing I thought was, what's the World Trade Center? I had no idea. I mean, I'm a young guy in my 20s. I just moved to the city, essentially, just trying to get my life going. And, I didn't know what the World Trade Center was. I didn't know where it was. And as it turns out, there were going to be a lot of things that I didn't know that we were probably all going to find out over the coming weeks and months and years. But they said, "Look, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." And I remember having this conversation, this very innocent conversation. Like, how come accidents like that don't happen more often? You see buildings and planes and that's bound to happen, right? And, you're thinking the person fell asleep at the wheel or the stick or whatever, or something happened, right? And then they start talking about the kind of plane it was and the kind of aircraft and all these kinds of things. And we're kind of doing our work, but we're kind of paying attention as well. And before too long, maybe an hour goes by, a second plane hits. And that was the moment that we knew something was wrong. That was the moment we knew something was wrong. And I remember the news anchors, they didn't know if they were supposed to be showing it, but they couldn't really turn the cameras off. They didn't really know how to report on what was actually happening. And they tried to be positive, and they tried to say things like, the World Trade Centers, these buildings are made to withstand this kind of impact. And so it's going to be really bad that, the fires are going to go out and all this kind of stuff. And they're kind of talking through it. And we're kind of looking for answers. And at this point, the volume's up on the TV and we're all glued to this thing. And then they start to collapse. And I think we've all seen the videos. We've seen the pictures. People covered in gray dust, people running from ash clouds. I mean, it looked like something from a movie, right? And I guess props to people who have been making movies all these years to make it look so real. We just couldn't believe it. And we all took off early. I think just about everything in America just closed down because we had this sense that we wanted to be together. We wanted to get to where other people were. It didn't matter if you were in a church. It didn't matter if people were inviting you over to their homes. It was like, let's all get together. Let's talk about this. And listen, I'm an introvert's introvert, okay? But I had this desire to just be with people and to ask questions that I know nobody had the answers to. Who did this? Who's responsible for this? How could this happen? What actually happened? How many planes were it? Are there more out there? Is this going to continue? Those kinds of things, right? And then eventually we're asking the questions, who did this? So we know whose tail we got to go kick and try to do some kind of retaliation, right? And it seemed like it just took forever to get any kind of answers. And I guess for the people who didn't live through it, essentially, or didn't have that experience of it, there's the tragedy side of it that, I don't want to say you missed out on, but you didn't experience that. There's some other things that are kind of hard to explain. Looking up in the sky, once the planes were cleared to fly again, and looking up in the sky and seeing a plane, things that you'd seen your whole life, and wondering if that was going to be the next one. And people talk about a post 9/11 world and a pre 9/11 world, and it's very real. And unfortunately, it's something that's also very difficult to explain. The feeling of security when you went out, and safety wherever you were, and acts of violence to that degree were really just it wasn't even a thought you had. Some people, that's the only world they've grown up in, and maybe you get used to it, maybe that's all you know, and that's okay. But there's another piece to it. There's another thing that you kind of missed out on that I wish you could have experienced. You see, in those days and maybe a few weeks following the 9/11 attacks, there was something about America that seemed like we were a little bit more of the kind of place deep down we want to be. We were unified around principles, freedom primarily, justice as another one. We believed in the value of human life, and we saw the taking of human life as a real tragedy. Politicians, the line that typically splits us, they got blurred for a little while, maybe a week or two, and it seemed like we had the right focus. How do we get America going again? How do we help people feel that we can move forward? How do we take care of each other? And over those weeks of seeing new images come out of the tragedy and new video footage coming out of the tragedy and those kinds of things, which was hard to see over and over and over again, we also had these stories of first responders. I mean, you think about how first responders are treated right now, how cops are labeled and everything else. But in those days, they were the heroes of heroes. The cops, the firefighters, the paramedics, they had sacrificed themselves, and they epitomized heroism. And strangers were doing the same for each other, and there was a sense of neighborliness that I don't think we really experienced since then. I know it's possible, but we've got to get to a place where we're a united people over the good things that happen, not just over the tragedies. And until that day comes, which I think it can happen, I think we've got to learn. I think we've got to grow some more, and I think we've got to learn. But until that day happens, we're going to have some hard roads ahead. For those of us that remember what it was like in those days to feel connected because you were an American and the person next to you was an American, that was a good feeling. Maybe I'll try to hold on to that for a few days. Maybe you can too.